Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everyone's feeling good. Welcome everyone who's here. I see Sister Asli's typing in the chat, mashallah. This is our weekly gathering every Thursday, Fast and Learn. And we have our amazing guest, instructor, facilitator, community organizer, mover and shaker, artistic giant in the DMV area, holding it down, for the Muslim Brothers Collective, mashallah. Who knows? We might be blessed with a piece. We might not. I don't know, towards the end of this, Allahu Alam, maybe if we put the pressure, we might get a little piece, inshallah. So, briefly, what I'll do is to start, I'll go briefly over community agreements. I'll make it short but sweet, and then I'll pass it over to Nesima to begin. So, now, as you can see, my facilitation skills aren't as good as my wife's, but, I do what I can, you know what I mean? I do what I can. Don't judge me, okay? So, ground rules. Number 1, we all have value. Essentially, what this means is that every single one of you inside this gathering has something that you can contribute to the discussion, and we, as in the collective in this gathering, will benefit immensely from you sharing who you are and what you are and how you are. And we want to make this as interactive as possible. I would also like to add, if it's at all possible, if you could cut on your cameras, only because I do not want Nesima to feel like she's just speaking to letters, no pressure, because people might be doing things that maybe they can't get on the camera. They might be at work, multitasking. I don't know what's happening, but if you can, we would appreciate that immensely. So number 1, we all have value. Number 2, make it plain. Essentially, what it means is break it down. If you say a term that is a technical term, or maybe perhaps a term that is another language that the audience may not know, try to do your best to try to break it down and explain it to the people, so that hopefully we all can be on the same playing field, if you will, and understanding what's being said. For the third one, and I'll stop at 4 and open it up. We normally say the no Takashi rule, aka no snitching, aka Vegas rules. But because this is being broadcasted, and more than 1 million people are probably going to be listening to this, we want to make sure that no pressure, Nesima. I don't know. We want to make sure instead of no Takashi rule, we'll say skillful disclosure. Be mindful of what you share in a space that is semi-secure, semi-sacred. Things that you say in a space will likely be shared among other people. So be mindful of that when sharing ideas that you have. So skill, my spelling is horrible. Good thing we got, some writers in the room. So mashallah, to correct me. The last one that I will call upon is, and I had it in the back of my mind and then it slipped my mind. We can agree to disagree. We can agree to disagree. We all have different perspectives. We have different ways of looking at things. And one of the things that we value is our ability to make friends and be close with and build with people that see things differently than we see them. And we see that as a strength rather than a problem or a challenge. I think we all benefit from being around people who help us sharpen our ideas and our perspectives with the ideas that they have that sometimes might be different than what we might have. And so what I'll say before passing it off to Nesima, is there anything else that any one of you would like to add to today's discussion? Feel free to cut on your mic or type inside the chat. Okay, mashallah. Seems like we're good to go. With that said, I'll pass it over to Nesima. Who got the keys to the I know you've heard that many times, so you probably say it now. My apologies. Pass on to Nesima for now.
Well, thank you, Mohammed. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I know I can't see all of your faces, but it's nice to be here with you, taking some time to talk together in community. especially during this time when we're not able to see each other in person. So today's topic is identity politics, and that term, I'm not just talking about it exclusively with the definition of identity politics, but I kind of wanted to generate a discussion, especially since we just came out of a very intense election season, and one we're still dealing with in terms of results and one party's acceptance of it. I wanted to touch on how you view identity, what identity means to you, and how that fuels or influences your participation and connection to community and politics as a whole, and how you see yourself. And so I want this to be like a discussion and not really a lecture. Like, I'm not like a professor, or like I'm not a political science professor, but as someone who works in social change communications and is working with a lot of different nonprofits and organizations that are working at the grassroots to really make sure that people are represented fairly in politics, and that philanthropy really represents them and their ideas and doesn't just give lip service and do, shows just to make themselves feel better. We saw that a lot with Black Lives Matter this summer, of people rushing to say that they believe Black Lives Matter, but then not really doing a lot to prove that. And so I want this to be kind of an open discussion about, how we relate to each other, especially as Muslim Americans, and we all have other identities within that. I know this is recording live, so you may not actually share everything you would want to share, but like, hopefully you do feel that this is a space you can talk openly and honestly, because I think that will make this be a more interesting conversation. And I'm going to lean on you all to give me examples of your life and what you're going through, and how we can all be there for one another as we work to make this country better for us and for everyone. So in talking about what does identity politics mean, it's you probably heard it being used in a negative way, especially lately, of accusing people of basically being very exclusive in how they make alliances and who they work with and how they vote based off of their identity, right? But I'm curious what you have heard about identity politics and how you would define it, either from what you've heard in school or work or just on your own. So I'm seeing a clash of various cultures. It could be, if you're looking at it in a more, and if you're looking at it in a way where one party wins, there's only one winner and one loser. People can often say identity politics is what moves people to decide or vote a particular way simply because they identify with that group. So if you're white men, you're going to identify a certain way. If you're rich, you're going to identify and vote a certain way. If you're Muslim, you're going to vote a certain way. If you're a woman, a Black woman. And so although it's been used often in a negative way, identity politics is not really something that only one group does or one person does. Because when you really think about it, who you are, all of your lived experiences influences how you vote. So although identity politics is usually seen as something that like minorities or communities of color are voting by or are organizing around, white people also do it too. Men do it too. Whoever's in power is also voting and is also organizing and mobilizing through their perspective, right? So everyone has it. It's something we all do. And it's, I think, an extra challenge to think outside of yourself and think about how policies affect other people and those who are more vulnerable than you, who have less power, and what are you doing to ensure that they are taken care of as well. I think I saw another mention in the chat, the divisive nature of politics. Do you mind expanding on that, like what you mean by that? Not to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you had more you wanted to say on that.
Hi, can you see me?
Allahu Akbar. Yes, we can.
Okay, I've got my French beret here. Forgive me.
Okay. Now you're great.
Black Panther swag. I can dig it.
Awesome, Black Panther. You are full of laughs today. I love it. This is peace. So yeah, that's the divisive nature of politics. I feel like people micromanage their identities and they foreground what's ever in their best interest at the time. When there's a deeper kind of intersectionality to this, where we need to be uniting at different points: race, class, culture, gender, sexuality. And I think that identity politics, it seems like more of a focus on what divides us, like instead of building across groups or across cultures and institutions to unite us.
Okay, yes. Thank you for explaining that further, because I just wanted to make sure I wasn't, taking it the wrong way. And yeah, I think that's something that really speaks to what a lot of people have been complaining about over the last 4 years, right? And also, statistics has shown, right, that our country has become even more divided than it was 4 years ago. And we're at a point now where, speaking to this current election, right, it was, despite how ridiculous the past 4 years have been under the Trump administration, you would have thought that it would have been a complete landslide then, right, for whoever was challenging him. And in this case, it was Biden. But it was, as we saw, neck and neck. And we didn't have the results immediately as quickly as we thought. Obviously, this was different because we're in a pandemic. So there were other reasons why it took a while for all those votes to be counted. But to see how close it was really deeply troubling, right? To know that our country is still just as divided, and voting for an administration that actually values people's lives and all people's lives should have been a given, and it wasn't, right? And so what does that mean? And how do we then organize together and mobilize with other people who are different than us? And so I want to ask another question. Knowing that this election was so divisive and contested, and continues to be contested, right, by President Trump, who still hasn't conceded. What do you think of folks who are saying that, well, now that the Democrats won, just remember, you should still be nice to, the people who lost, and don't rub it in their face. Do you think that is fair? Or do you think after everything that we've gone through the last 4 years and seeing how Trump supporters treated people who didn't vote for him 4 years ago, do you think it's okay to celebrate and to say, yes, we won? I'll just open that to you guys.
So one thing I was thinking of is, have you seen the photograph that was passed around on Facebook where they said, today we chose the student who stutters over the bully?
I didn't see that.
Yeah, so it's whether you like it or not, Biden isn't the perfect speaker. People question him all the time, but we didn't choose the bully, which is Trump, and it's really important that we come together and say, hey, you know what? I guess this world is a playground or a classroom, and we need to build on each other's strengths. So I think that I wish we could really rejoice that we have, Kamala Harris, she represents so many different people, South Indian, or South Asian, and then as Jamaican, she's Black, she's from a mixed background, and she has a lot to bring to the table as a senator. All of this is great, to celebrate. And I wish we could, but we're contested, by Trump, who just won't accept the facts, So I feel like we won't get to win until they actually acknowledge that they lost the election.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's interesting. So I didn't see that photo that you had mentioned, but even at that point, how we're at a point where we've reduced, right, candidates to very simple things, and they're not just a candidate, but they represent something, right, a value, an idea, an identity. And granted, these are two white men, so you're also how much difference are we really getting here? And for many people who voted for Biden, they didn't necessarily like him, right? They just did not like Trump. So that's also important to acknowledge in this election, that for many people, they didn't really feel like they had the choices they wanted. And I'm seeing a message in the chat that it was just one lesser evil than the other in the office. And they're very skeptical about everything. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that's a really important point to bring up, right? Like, not everyone was enthusiastic about Biden, even though they're glad that Trump lost, right? But there's a lot of work to be done because he may not necessarily represent all of the things that we wanted. His policies, his record, his background. And for many folks who, although are excited about Kamala in terms of her and her identity being represented in the White House, does representation always bring the best results, right? Is representation really the goal, or is representation a means to an end? Because what happens when you have someone who looks like you in office or who has power, but actually, has a horrible, stands for horrible things, wants to take away your healthcare, wants to take away your, your freedom of religion, wants to, add more to like criminalization of Black and brown people, right? And these are a lot of things that people are worried about with Kamala. Looking at her record as a district attorney, a lot of folks have issues with what she did then. And so now, even though she is taking on this, barrier breaking role, for some, it's not a wonderful thing. And so how do we make space for people to share that disappointment, right? Or to share a balance, right? Of wanting to be happy, but also saying, I don't know if this was the person I wanted to really take that. And I think that's really important, right? And respecting that there will be differences even within folks who identify as you, right? Like they could also be Black women and not be excited. They could also be, South Asian women and not be excited. And that's really important when we talk about identity politics, is that knowing that we are not a monolith. Muslims are not a monolith, right? There are some Muslims that voted for Trump, as hard as it is to believe. There were Black people that voted for Trump. There were Latino people that voted for Trump. And it's easy to say, like, but how, right? It's easy to say how. And I don't know for you all, like, were most of the people in your network, do they all align with your political views, or do you have friends and family and people in your network that think and vote differently? Just want to put that out there for you all.
I have some Candace Owens fans in my friendship circle, so...
Oh, wait, not the party for that, my bad.
At this party.
But I mean, Kamala Harris, at least she shattered the glass ceiling. You have to acknowledge it. She won the title, at least, so it's possible. And even with someone like Obama, you have to say, well, we did have a Black male president, and so it's in the history books. Even if you don't agree with all his policies, it's a step that we took as a nation that you have to acknowledge.
What do other people think about that? Anyone else want to chime in on the diversity or maybe lack of diversity of their the political views in their network?
So I would say I feel like I do have an eclectic group of folks in my circle and in my family. A lot of conservative folk, a handful of Republican/conservative folks. And of course, folks who are more liberal and democratic leaning. I would say, because of how diverse the circles are that I am very intentional about putting myself in, because what happens sometimes is that I get comfortable being around certain people who see things the way I see them, and sometimes I had the tendency of intentionally not being around people who didn't have certain specifically political perspectives. But what I found as I started being intentional about trying to break some of that, to try to have a better understanding of different people and their perspectives, I start to realize, one, that oftentimes there's a lot of similarities, which is sounds kind of cliche. But then also I realize how people can actually really mean well, even if they have politics that I consider to be toxic. Like and the opposite can be true also. Like people who ideologically speaking I might be more aligned with, I can be very toxic also, like very toxic. And so, I feel in many ways I actually mean it 100%, the whole, and why we say it at the beginning of our gatherings, we can agree to disagree. Like we can go hard in the paint and fight over like ideas, and then we can get some coffee afterwards and chill. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the kind of circle of friends that I associate with. A lot of people who I don't agree with. And I feel like as a result, it has made my positions, it allows me to better understand myself also, because then sometimes I'm challenged in a way that I wouldn't be challenged if I'm just talking to people who see things the way I see them. No, I'm not sure if that is helpful in the question that was presented.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because one of the common things I've heard from people in my circle, especially during this year, was that they don't believe in the idea of we can agree to disagree, and that there's a limit to that, right? Like I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing of it, but it was like we can disagree on like pizza toppings, but not racism, right? Like, are there certain topics that we shouldn't allow people to disagree with us on, right? Like, it's very easy to say, like, oh yeah, we were fighting and we disagreed about something, but like we're still friends at the end of the day. At what point will you say, actually, no, like you not believing in something that I value, it is too much, right? Like that is in direct conflict and could potentially hurt me and my life and people that I love. Do I have to be okay with that? Do I have to accept that? And does that fall under identity politics? Or is that just you having values that you hold on to, and that you believe that if we do not push and challenge the whole of society to be on the same page about something, like we're not all going to get to that point of liberation, right? If we say it's okay that some of your friends are racist, but like otherwise they're really good people, and like if you hadn't asked them about that one question, right, like everything would have been fine. But it's like, okay, but once you know, are you really going to be cool with it? And can you ever go back, right? And I think that's a lot of people saw over these last 4 years, right? Is suddenly realizing, and that happened to me, like mostly people that I'm not close to, so it was okay, but like people that I went to high school with, college with, maybe I had one class with, and suddenly you're seeing their posts come up and they're revealing some very ugly thoughts. And I'm just like, am I okay with that? Because if I hadn't seen that post, everything else I was okay with when it came to them. But now that I know this thing about them, like, do I want them a part of my circle? Am I going to close myself off to only people who validate me and my identity and make me feel safe and loved and accepted? And it's a tricky balance, right? Because some people say like, no, you have to have that opening so like other people can hear your perspectives and point of views. But it's also like, okay, but at what point is it like, they're clearly not listening to me. They don't care what I have to say. So do I need to take up that energy and give them that space in my life? And am I going to do the free labor to like try and educate them and spend hours on Facebook, right, with them? And then ultimately, you know, whatever show they watched on TV or whatever like WhatsApp thread that they read, that ultimately is like what they're going to believe over me. I think there eventually has to be a limit, right? And we all have to determine that for ourselves. I don't think there's like one right answer. But that's one thing that I thought a lot about over the last 4 years is realizing that I didn't know a lot of people's political views before this. I wasn't as politically active for a number of reasons, but I think a lot more people also weren't either, especially those who weren't already like working in movements or who were not personally affected by a lot of policies and had the privilege, right, to just be like, I didn't vote, but I was okay. And like, everything turned out fine for me. Like, that's a huge privilege. But for people who have been affected by these policies for years and decades and generations, right, like they know what's what, they know who's responsible, and like what needs to get pushed back on. And the rest of us are just playing catch up. Like, we're just suddenly learning about all these things and are like, oh my God, this. And like, oh my God, Obama actually had this bad policy, but like, we thought he was so great. And like, you know, we were so excited for him. And it's a little bit of giving yourself room for heartbreak and remembering that politicians are not like celebrities, really. They're not supposed to be celebrities, and they're not supposed to be our friends, right? They're supposed to be employees for us, and they're supposed to serve us and our needs. And so remembering that we have that power and we have that ability to say, you know, if you're not doing your job, we elected you. And this goes for the new administration, right? That we all worked to get into office. If they don't, you know, as we hold them accountable, if they don't respond to our needs as a community, as Muslims, as women, as men, Black and brown folks, immigrants, Native Americans, you know, however you identify, if this new administration doesn't represent us, we can always say, all right, you're out too. And I think that's what's important to think about, is remembering that flexibility, right? Of, yes, voting for identity can be good, right? And representation, but to not let that, not let that make you like take your foot off the gas, right? Because for a lot of people, I think we're like, sigh of relief. Like, Trump didn't get into office, you know, he didn't win again. But as many organizers are saying, like, the work continues. And someone said in the chat, the work continues. And I see another comment that 35% of American Muslims voted for Trump. I didn't even know the stat, but that is just, I don't even know what to say. Like, 35%, that is 35% too much. And also, I'm not a citizen, so I could not vote, but honestly, not sure if I would have. And that's how a lot of people did feel, even if they did have the ability to vote. I mean, voter suppression was a huge issue this year, and it's always been, but there are people who did have the right and didn't vote. And of course, you know, there's all kinds of reasons to be upset if they didn't, but I think that's real. And I'm curious, do you all know anyone who didn't vote? And how did that make you feel in this election? Did you try and encourage more people to vote this year or not? I'm curious to know kind of like how you were engaged in this election. That's like open to anyone.
My mom forced me to go out and vote. She was very engaged in it. She really did not want Trump to be reelected.
And why did she force you? Like, you weren't interested without her involvement?
I just had so many assignments, but she offered to drive me there while I was in class, so I just did that.
Nice. Okay, so it was more of like a logistical challenge that you were not sure you wanted to
I was
overcome.
planning on voting early, but I missed the due date, and then I did it the last day I voted.
Well, props to your mom for giving you an opportunity to still vote. Anyone else? Did anyone vote by mail, vote early, or on election day?
So I voted by mail months ahead of time, but I was afraid they wouldn't count my vote because of the way Trump was so distrustful of the absentee ballots.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people worried about. I've voted by mail for many years, because up until a couple of years ago, I used to vote in Arizona, but I wasn't living there anymore. So I would always get something in the mail and would just mail it in. And honestly, I never checked that it was received, but I always did it. And it wasn't until this year when I requested an absentee ballot to vote in Virginia that I really wanted to make sure, because of all the issues that the Postal Service has been having with delays. I was like, okay, this is the one time I want to make sure that it actually will get it'll get counted, or otherwise I'm going to just show up if I have to. But luckily I learned that you could look it up online, and I was able to see with the Department of, I'm trying to remember the exact name, like the Virginia, whatever state elections department, you can when you're looking at your voter registration information, you can also see a record of how you voted and whether it was in person or by mail. And it actually said that my ballot was accepted. So like, once I saw that, I like breathed a sigh of relief. So I did that. That was how I did mine this year. And they even send you a sticker in the mail. Like, I think they were saying that some people like want to go on that day because they want the sticker, but now they're like, now you don't have an excuse. Even if you do it in the mail, you get a sticker too, which was cool. But yeah, I think I didn't do any like extra volunteering. Sadly, I didn't have the time. I was interested in being a poll worker, but I guess they promoted it so well this year that they needed more volunteers, and they were at capacity in Alexandria. So I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's good. Like, they don't need me. But that's something traditionally they've always had. They've struggled with, is to get people to work at the polls, because it's generally like older folks, and they were worried about that this year with COVID, that it would just be like, they'd be more vulnerable, and it wouldn't be a good idea to have older people manning the polling sites. Did anyone do anything else outside of voting? Did you like read more? Did you pass out flyers? Did you like help people get registered? And it's okay if you didn't. Those are like extra, like above and beyond kind of activities. Or are you interested in doing that? Looking ahead, I guess, is maybe another question. Now that you maybe have learned about how important those types of things are.
I posted on social media telling people to vote.
And that's huge. I know it may not sound like a lot, but considering that most of us are interacting with each other through social media, being able to interrupt, the food and fashion pictures and TikToks with messages about civic engagement are really important, especially when a lot of people just take it for granted and maybe just don't know how to do it. And if you just share like one easy thing about how to register, that helps a lot. So I want to be mindful of time and just ask kind of like a couple more questions. And like, if you all have questions as well, feel free to share or to ask. So one question I had was about what representation means to you, and why or why not is it important? And by representation, I mean like representation in, let's say, like politics or media or like positions of power.
I think it's important to have representation, as silly and superficial as it may sound, because people at the end of the day have to acknowledge how they're treated. For example, I know an Ethiopian Muslim immigrant who normally thought of himself as just Muslim or Ethiopian without actually associating a color with it. He did not, because the majority of his associates were Black anyway, and his family and friends, it didn't occur to him until he came to the US that he was Black. And he was stopped by the police and profiled, and he was treated unfairly in police custody and that kind of thing. So he said it really woke him up to how selective he had been in terms of aligning with people. And I think that President Obama said something special about how Trayvon Martin could have been his son. And so when it comes to issues like police brutality, you have to think, okay, whose side am I on? Not just because it's right, but because it represents me at the end of the day. I'm perceived as Black. And we have to acknowledge that if that's the case. So you try to ameliorate the situation for fellow Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of the Black Lives Matter movement is that a lot of like white people have decided to take on the mantle of the Black Lives Matter movement, and they're like saying, I won't tolerate racism anymore. I won't, even though I benefit from the system and I'm privileged, they won't accept the privilege, and they fight for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah, I think, being able to have people in power who, for them, it's not just another news story, or it's not just another, social justice chant. Like, to be able to say, like, even if I wasn't president, like, this would affect me and my children. Like, that's huge, because that they're going to think about things in a different way, and those words have power. And I think about another photo that was really popular, that was taken by the White House photographer at the time, and it was like Obama leaning over to allow like a young Black boy to touch his head. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
No.
And the story of that was, I think it was one of Obama's, one of the officials that worked for him, and he brought his son to the White House, and his son was just so fascinated to see someone who looked like him, and he wanted to know if his hair was like his. And so Obama was like, yeah, you can feel it here, touch my head. And that's such like one of those moments that, for someone to not even imagine that like someone who looks like me can be in that type of position, that's powerful, and as small of a moment as that seems, and like putting aside, the complicated nature of Obama and his presidency, for so many Black children, like that was huge, right? That they just were like, they don't even know anything about politics, right? But they're just like, are you like me? And can someone who looks like me, be a president? And like how amazing that is, and recognizing that that's huge, putting aside again, like however you feel about the politics, representation for young people, I think that's something that I always believe is going to be hugely influential and positive. And that's something that I appreciate, that like generations to come, and even like the younger kids right now, they probably think they can do a lot more than what I thought I could do as a kid. Like I know I was very aware as a young child that like people who looked like me did not do certain things. So even if I like enjoyed those activities or was interested in them, I like self-rejected, right? That like that wasn't possible for me because, well, there's just no way. Like if it was, and someone else would have done it, And there's always that fear, right, of being the first. It sucks, right? Trying to be the first in any situation. And I think that's something a lot of like diversity initiatives are trying to deal with, right? Is like trying to get people in to be the first of whatever. But that's a huge burden to have, right? Because if you don't do everything perfectly, you'll never hear the end of it. And people will be like, well, this is why, you don't have someone like you in this position, or it's affirmative action, right? That's something that people say. You didn't really earn it. It was just because you're insert whatever identity. And that's hard, right? That's hard to deal with. And I'm sure all of you have been maybe the first in, or the only in a room. And I'm curious how that makes you feel. Have you been the first or the only of whatever identity you identify with? And how did that make you feel?
So I have an example of being a first. So I was the first Black America's National Teenager. It's a national scholarship pageant, and I had fun with it. I did oratory, and so I didn't do a talent until the year I crowned someone else. So I didn't want to be seen as, oh, the Black dancer, or, oh, of course she can dance, she's Black, and then just being from Tennessee and being the minority, I felt like I had to be like 3,000 times better than everyone else just to get recognized for a basic achievement. And it was really frustrating because they wanted me to be like fluent in like 3 or 4 languages and like everything, dot my I's, cross my T's. And they didn't expect the same results from my white counterparts. And so like I had friends, like I definitely had fun in the pageant. Like I was voted Miss Congeniality both times I participated.
That's awesome.
But, thanks, But the first year I participated, I think that was a year I should have won, but like they gave it to someone else. And I remember one of the judges, or actually two of them, came up to my mother and said, you should contest this, because the only reason they didn't accept her is because she's Black. They said, you had the grades, you had the scores, and the volunteer service. And so it is an issue. You have to be 1,000 times better or more, and then you'll get looked over, the first time around. I had to go through the pageant system twice. And on the second round, it was their 25th anniversary. And so they kind of made it this, 25th anniversary, first Black American national teenager, anything they could hype them up, to show how progressive they are. And also I'm like, suddenly you're my, supporter or whatever.
Now they want you.
Yeah.
When it benefits them.
Yeah, when it benefits them, when it's on their agenda. And I wish we could just look at people, because there are things that I excel in and there are other things where I struggle. So I'd love it if people were just honest with me about, what my strengths and weaknesses are, so I can take a realistic look at myself in the mirror, and so I can see the best in myself and others, just based on the qualities and the characteristics they possess, and not the distorted lens through which we see because of racism and sexism and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's just a great example of, the burden of trying to be yourself, but then also suddenly being used as a model for whatever your identity is. And it's great if you're appreciating the fact that I'm Black, but I'm here as a dancer, and I would love it if you could just recognize me and my achievements and award me for that, and not suddenly when it's cutesy and fits, their PR image. But I mean, I think that's amazing that you were willing to go through that experience several times, and that, it was something that you were passionate about, I'm assuming, and that you enjoyed. But, just didn't get that understanding and recognition the way that you'd hoped.
Yeah, and I wish I would even stay in touch with some of them, but it's not the same. It really is sad. You know, the pageant system's not the same. And I inspired some of my friends, my white American friends, to enter into pageants. And one guy I liked in high school ended up marrying a pageant winner. I was like, thanks, not me.
Well, when I think about pageants, I do think about like one of the barrier breaking participants. I know it's like a different system maybe than from what you were doing, but like Halima Aden, the Somali American, she's from Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like a refugee and then ended up entering into her like Miss USA or Miss America pageant for her state. And then, was the first one to wear a burkini, which I'm sure most of them were probably like, what are you even doing? Like,
I know.
And like, look at her now. She's like an ambassador for UNICEF, and she's like a legit model and not like pigeonholed into like modest fashion, but like she walks runways, she does photo shoots with mainstream brands.
That's a true beauty pageant. I did a scholarship pageant, so mine was like a scholarship for college, just like
still just as cool, but kind of just like saying that there are ways that like moments when people they are able to like get through, even if they don't win the initial thing, like just remembering that there's like a longer term plan for you, and that like every effort that you make is recognized and is worthwhile. And even if people don't see it initially, it doesn't mean that like what you're doing is not meaningful, right? Like you have a purpose, right? You have a mission, and like Allah designed all of us to have like a personal mission, and for some of us we may know it earlier than others, and all of these structures that we have to deal with, like racism or sexism, Islamophobia, those are all legitimate barriers, and we should very much acknowledge them and work together to dismantle those systems. But knowing that like at the end of the day, whatever effort you're putting in to be the best at what you do, like that is going to be seen and that is going to be rewarded in the end. And sometimes, unfortunately, it won't always be in this world and in this life in the way that we want it. So while some of us might be trying to be like, the first Muslim, like magazine editor, the first Muslim, like whatever CEO of Fortune 500 company, right? It's good to have goals like that, to want to be, a barrier breaking person or a pioneer, right? Because you want to then bring folks along with you, right? Not just to have the title yourself, but to make sure that it's easier for other people to achieve that. It's easier for other people to be in those spaces and be themselves. So I think for me, at least, that's what it's about. Like, so many spaces I've been in, I've been the only one, or I've been the first, and it's been uncomfortable and painful. But I then know that I will, whatever I learn from that experience, like, it's easier now for like my cousin, right? or someone who looks like me, someone from my community, to then do the same thing. And so I always try to keep that in my head and remind myself when I am struggling, right? Or when I do feel like, is this worth it, right? Like being the only Muslim here, or being the only woman, only black woman. It can be very isolating, but knowing that like everything you're going through, it's worth it in the end, which is just easier to say here, easier to say when you're not in the situation, but like eventually, in hindsight, you will realize that like the work that you put in to represent yourself and people like you is meaningful.
I agree.
That's all. Oh,
but
yeah.
But may I make a prediction?
Yes.
So I think that you would be an excellent Alexandria Poet Laureate. And sometimes it reminds me how it happens in increments, because this current Alexandria Poet Laureate is African American, but she's Christian. And so I daily pray for Nesima to be the first Black Muslim Alexandria Poet Laureate. And I'm just like, that'd be so awesome, because you open the door for other people, and Kaniki Jakarta, props to her. She's a great poet in her own right, and she does really good work. But I enjoy following you on Instagram and seeing the November, extravaganza. And so I want you to reach out and go for those barrier breaking moments, because I think you have some in your future.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Definitely did not expect anything about me to be said, but no, I really appreciate that. And you supporting me as a fellow sister. That's really nice, and it's very kind of you. So thank you, Ursula. But so that's all I really had to share, and I really appreciate you all being honest and sharing your experiences and your thoughts on identity and representation and what that means to you. I know these are pretty like heavy and complicated topics, so hopefully I made them, more fun and interesting to engage with. But if anyone have any like last thoughts or reflections, how they're feeling post-election, just anything.
What I would like to say is that, because there's only like 7 minutes left, it would be dope if like we get like a poem. No pressure. This two poetess.
How did I know this was coming?
Yeah.
I'm just saying. I mean, no pressure.
Nesima on the mic.
No pressure.
Let me see what I can do.
Them bars. You know what I'm saying?
Gentle keys, sister.
I'm not like you though. I have to do the caveat of that. I don't really memorize my stuff. My poems are not. I don't know if I qualify them as spoken word, but
as long as it's audible.
So this was one I wrote recently that I had shared. I go through different versions of myself in the summer. I fly untethered, rising like the heat and in love with the uncertainty of it all. But it always ends right before fall. Something happens to me in the leaves. We start to shiver from the cold and our colors betray us. This season settles me, forces me to choose, asks me who and what will I invite to keep me warm now. The truth or something close enough.
Dang. SubhanAllah. That's like a moment.
Thank you. I felt like that was fitting for like a fall transitional season. We're in that moment where we're like, what's going to happen? So
and our colors betray us. Dang. SubhanAllah. Dang.
It's the fall. It's the moody fall vibes. That's where my mind was at. So.
Mashallah.
Thank
So
you.
with that, alhamdulillah, I want to thank you for sharing your content and being so gracious to, share some amazing thoughts and ideas regarding this topic of identity politics with the community. You know what I'm saying? I know that you're a busy person. There's a lot of things you got going on. And I'm glad that you are willing to, take some time out of your day, and share some stuff with us. And the poem at the end, mashallah.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And I thank the rest of you who were able to join, taking the time out of your day to talk about this. I appreciate that.
Most definitely.
And I learned from you all too.
MashaAllah. Remember, agree to disagree. But some people need to be canceled. No, I'm just...
Right. Now when it comes to racism.
With that being said, y'all, this MashaAllah. We ask that all praise be due to Allah. We ask Allah to send His peace and blessings upon Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family and his companions. May Allah allow us to be continuous and to be to live and die as Muslims and to be true to who we are and to fight against what needs to be fought against. And may Allah allow us, our children, to live and die as Muslims and to be to embody compassion and mercy and all that jazz. This is Fast and Learn. Inshallah, we will see you all next Thursday. Each Thursday, there's a new topic and a new person, and this is dope. Assalamu alaikum.